It is not the critic who counts, not the person who points out how the strong person stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man or the woman who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends him or herself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he or she fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his or her place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat.
And joining me today is Lynn Garvey Hodge of the Fairfax County Historical Commission, and clearly very much dressed in that period of attire to show us the suffragist movement in its full swing. So welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure to be here, Andrew.
And so I have to ask very simply, as your attire shows, you're one of the most uniquely dressed guests I think we've ever had. And so one of the things I can't help but notice is that today, with Macy's celebrating its anniversary, they have a nice rare black and white shot of a woman dressed almost like you entering in there. But the one thing I know she is definitely not wearing is the I guess the sash going across. And can you tell us a little about that?
I'd be happy to. The sash represents the suffragist colors, and the suffragists very intentionally chose purple and white and yellow to represent their cause. Purple stood for dignity and loyalty. In other words, dignity and loyalty to be able to be both patriotic but dignified to be able to vote. The white stood for purity. It also was a color of the Prohibition era, and those that were supporting the temperance movement. And much of that movement and the suffragist movement overlapped. And the yellow represents the golden rays of the sun and the future. It also represents the sunflower, which is the state flower of Kansas. Kansas is a state that ironically once had the vote for women, once women were allowed to vote there, lost it, and then they had to fight to get it back again. So it's a reminder that having the right to vote is something that is very precious and something that really any of us could lose. Back in 1848 was the original Seneca Falls Convention. That is where we hear about Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott, and Susan B. Anthony. Those were the ladies that helped make that convention happen back in 1848.
The Progressive Era, it's kind of tough when you have to teach it.
Yes.
So if you wanted just to go ahead and give that big attention grabber for the audience, where do you start?
I think one of the biggest attention grabbers, especially for your students, would be to help them see how many key events in the Progressive Era happened right here in Northern Virginia. And there's three key ones I can think of. The first one is the building and identification of Lorton Reformatory. In 1908, President Teddy Roosevelt saw how deplorable the conditions were in Washington, D.C. at the jailhouse there. They were absolutely horrific in terms of sanitation and food and how the prisoners were treated. And with the Progressive Era came a sense of renewed energy about being outdoors in a healthy environment and enjoying learning a trade and being proud of learning a craft. And so the thinking at that time was rehabilitation. And also remember, 1890s was not that far after the Civil War. So a lot of people remembered the Civil War and remembered just how horrific it was and all the terrible atrocities. So they really wanted to start looking out for one another. People wanted to look out for one another, to find a worthy cause and to fight for it, as Teddy Roosevelt so beautifully said in his speech at the Sorbonne when he gave a long address over there. And so what happened at Lorton Reformatory was Teddy Roosevelt decided that there needed to be a place built for the male prisoners in Washington, D.C., and so 1,154 acres of land were purchased in northern Virginia down towards Occoquan. The area now is called Lorton Laurel Hill. And when the first prisoners arrived there in about 1910, 1911, they showed up with tents. There were no buildings. There was nothing to house them in. And so they ended up making their own bricks, making their own kiln to make the bricks. At the height of the kiln's production, over 20,000 bricks a day were made. And so by 1917 or so, there were about 30 buildings on the Lorton property, some of which we can recognize today when we drive down 123.
Joining us once again from the Fairfax County Historical Commission is Lynn Garvey Hodge, bringing us today her book from Arcadia Publishing, Clifton, looking at a nice pictorial history. So Lynn, welcome back to the show once again.
It's good to be here, Andrew. Good to see you.
I'm glad to see you too. And so tell me, why Clifton?
Why Clifton is because I've lived there now for just about 10 years, and I have just absolutely been fascinated with the history that's part of the town. Nan Netherton some years ago wrote a book called Brigadoon, Clifton the Brigadoon of Virginia, and Nan became a very good friend of mine. And as I began to appreciate her research, it seemed like there was still more stones to unturn and more information to uncover, and so it really kind of spurred me on to learn more about Clifton's just very colorful and interesting and historic past.
And for most people, they don't realize where is Clifton exactly in the grand scheme of things, because you hear the name and you say, oh, there's traffic out in Clifton, but what does that mean? Northern Virginia seems to encompass so much, and
it does.
People think it's everywhere. But
yes.
Can you tell us exactly where Clifton is for those who are trying to say, okay, so where is this place now?
Yes, I'd be happy to. Clifton is in southwestern Fairfax County. And if you take Route 123 as if you were heading out to Occoquan, south to Occoquan, you would turn a right on Chapel Road, so named because at one time there were about 5 or 6 different chapels in Clifton, and follow it down about 5 or 6 miles and you'll end up right in the heart of Clifton. Another way to get there is to take Route 29 as if you were heading out to Gainesville and Centerville and make a left onto Clifton Road. Clifton first was inhabited by Native Americans. And we have evidence that they were in the Clifton area anywhere between 13,000 and 15,000 years ago. And this is a wonderful picture of what the landscape the Native Americans would have found in Clifton. This is Pope's Head Creek.